Hey everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into a story that literally put the world on wheels. It's a tale of innovation, ambition, and a dream that reshaped our society. We're talking about the dawn of the automobile age. So buckle up as we travel back in time. Picture this. It's the late 19th century. The world is a patchwork of horse-drawn carriages, steam-powered trains, and bustling cities lit by gas lamps. If you were wealthy enough, you might own an automobile, but these weren't the cars we know today. They were magnificent, handcrafted machines, essentially motorized coaches. Each one was a unique masterpiece, built to order for the super-rich. Think of them as the private jets of their time, symbols of extreme luxury and status, meticulously assembled by skilled artisans. These early cars were noisy, unreliable, and more of a fascinating hobby for the elite than a practical mode of transport. For the vast majority of people, the idea of owning one was as far-fetched as owning a castle. But beneath the surface of this gilded age, a different kind of energy was crackling. Across the Atlantic, America was a cauldron of invention. The air was thick with the smoke of factories and the buzz of new ideas. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, creating a new class of engineers, mechanics, and thinkers who weren't content with the status quo. This was a nation fascinated by machinery, efficiency, and progress. People saw how mass production was changing everything from textiles to tools, and they started to wonder, what else could be transformed? This spirit of innovation wasn't just happening in big city workshops. It was alive in backyard sheds and small-town garages all over the country. It was in this environment that a new dream began to take hold. While the European elite paraded their bespoke motorcars, a few forward-thinking individuals in America saw something different. They didn't see a toy for the rich. They saw a tool for the masses. They envisioned a world where ordinary people, farmers, doctors, factory workers could have the freedom to travel beyond the limits of the railway line or the speed of a horse. Imagine being able to visit family in the next town whenever you wanted, or a farmer being able to get his produce to market quickly and easily. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about personal freedom, economic opportunity, and connecting the vast, sprawling landscape of America in a way that had never been possible before. These early dreamers were often seen as cranks and eccentrics. They tinkered with gasoline engines in their barns, facing countless setbacks, explosions, and failures. People laughed at their noisy, smelly contraptions. But these pioneers were driven by a powerful vision of mobility for all. They experimented with different designs, from steam-powered carriages to electric vehicles, each one a step towards a more accessible form of transportation. They were laying the crucial groundwork, solving fundamental problems of engineering and manufacturing, and most importantly, planting the idea in the public's mind that personal travel could be a right, not a privilege. And this is where our main character enters the story. Among all these innovators, one man was watching, learning, and forming a vision that was bolder and more radical than anyone else's. He was a farm boy from Michigan, a self-taught engineer with an obsession for mechanics and efficiency. He had worked on steam engines, repaired his neighbor's farm equipment, and built his first gasoline-powered vehicle, the quadricycle, in a shed behind his home. But he wasn't interested in building just one car. He wasn't even interested in building 100. His name was Henry Ford, and he was about to set in motion a revolution that would not only dominate the new century, but would fundamentally change the way we live, work, and even think. Ford saw the handcrafted luxury cars of Europe and the scattered experiments in America, and he recognized the missing piece of the puzzle: mass production. He believed that if a car could be made simple, reliable, and affordable enough, everyone would want one. It was a deceptively simple idea, but executing it would require a complete rethinking of manufacturing itself. He wasn't just dreaming of a new car. He was dreaming of a new industrial system. The stage was now perfectly set. The world was hungry for change, the technology was just beginning to mature, and the dream of universal mobility was waiting for someone with the audacity to make it a reality. Henry Ford was that person, and his arrival marks the end of the beginning and the start of the automobile age as we truly know it. And that's where we'll leave it for today. The story of Henry Ford and the Model T is a saga all its own, filled with triumphs and controversies that we'll explore in our next video. We've seen how the first cars were playthings for the wealthy, and how a wave of American innovation created the perfect launchpad for a revolution. It's a powerful reminder that the biggest changes often start with a simple, powerful idea. Thanks so much for joining me on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to see what happens next in the story of the automobile, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think was the most surprising fact from this era. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the Titans of Industry. Today, we read journeying back to the mid-19th century to uncover the roots of a man who didn't just build cars, but reshaped the very fabric of modern life. This is the story of Henry Ford's early years, where the seeds of a revolution were sown on a quiet Michigan farm. Our story begins on July 30th, 1863, in a farmhouse in Greenfield Township, Michigan. The Civil War was raging, but in this corner of the world, a new life began. Henry Ford was born to William and Mary Ford, the eldest of 6 children. His childhood was, in many ways, typical for the time. He grew up surrounded by the rhythms of agriculture, the demanding cycle of planting and harvesting. Farm life was hard work, from dawn until dusk. But for young Henry, the farm wasn't just a place of labor. It was his first laboratory. Unlike his siblings, Henry never truly took to the farm work. His mind wasn't on the crops or the livestock. Instead, he was captivated by something else entirely: machines. From a very young age, he showed a remarkable and almost obsessive curiosity about how things worked. While other boys played with sticks and balls, Henry was taking things apart. His father once gave him a pocket watch, and what did Henry do? He immediately disassembled it, piece by tiny piece, just to see the intricate dance of gears and springs inside. And remarkably, he put it back together perfectly. This wasn't just a one-time thing. He became the neighborhood's unofficial watch repairman, fixing timepieces for friends and family, honing his mechanical skills with every tick and tock. This fascination wasn't limited to small objects. The world was on the cusp of a mechanical age, and Henry was right there, soaking it all in. He was mesmerized by the powerful steam engines that powered trains and farm equipment. He saw them not as noisy, dirty contraptions, but as marvels of engineering, symbols of power and progress. He learned to operate and service these engines, his hands becoming as skilled as his mind was sharp. He saw the potential for machines to lighten the burden of human labor, a lesson learned firsthand from the grueling work on his family's farm. The clanking, steaming machines weren't just metal and fire to him. They were the future. This passion for mechanics was a calling he couldn't ignore. At the tender age of 16, Henry made a decision that would break his father's heart, but set the course for his own destiny. He left the farm. He packed a small bag and headed for the bustling, industrial heart of Michigan, Detroit. For a farm boy, Detroit was a different universe. It was a city humming with the sound of progress, filled with factories, foundries, and machine shops. This was where Henry knew he belonged. He found work as an apprentice machinist at the James F. Flower and Brothers machine shop, and later at the Detroit Dry Dock Company. For 3 years, he plunged himself into this world. He earned a meager $2.50 a week, but the real payment was the knowledge he gained. He worked long, grueling hours, but he was a sponge, absorbing everything he could about engines, metallurgy, and industrial processes. During the day, he was a dedicated apprentice. At night, he took on extra work repairing watches to supplement his income, his nimble fingers never still. This period was his true university, a hands-on education that no classroom could ever provide. After his apprenticeship, Henry returned to the family farm for a time. He hadn't given up on his mechanical dreams, but he needed to make a living. He operated and serviced Westinghouse steam engines, traveling between farms. He also found love, marrying Clara Jane Bryant in 1888. His father, hoping to keep him on the farm for good, gave him a parcel of land. For a while, it seemed like Henry might settle into a conventional life. He built a beautiful home for Clara and himself, complete with a workshop, of course. He ran a sawmill and managed the land. But the dream of something bigger, something that moved on its own power, never faded. The lure of the city and its electrical pulse proved too strong. In 1891, Henry and Clara moved back to Detroit. This time, he wasn't just a young apprentice. He was a man with a growing vision. He took a job as an engineer at the Edison Illuminating Company. Working for the company of his hero, Thomas Edison, was a dream come true. Here, he learned about a new, exciting source of power: electricity. His talent was quickly recognized, and within 2 years, he was promoted to chief engineer. This new position came with a good salary and, more importantly, more time and resources to pursue his personal obsession: building a gasoline-powered engine. In the small brick shed behind his rented house on Bagley Avenue, late into the night after his shift at the Edison plant, Henry Ford toiled away. While the city slept, he was experimenting, tinkering, and building. He worked with his friend, Charles King, poring over schematics from magazines, trying to perfect his design for an internal combustion engine. Clara was his unwavering supporter, holding a lamp for him during those long nights, believing in his vision even when it seemed like a distant fantasy. Then, in the early morning hours of June 4, 1896, the moment arrived. His creation, a simple frame fitted with 4 bicycle wheels and powered by a 2-cylinder engine, was complete. He called it the quadricycle. There was just one problem: it was too wide to fit through the door of his shed. Without a moment's hesitation, Henry grabbed an axe and smashed through the brick wall. He pushed his machine out into the alley, and with a sputter and a roar, the quadricycle chugged to life. He drove it through the quiet streets of Detroit, a solitary, noisy pioneer in a world still dominated by the horse. This wasn't just a joyride. It was the first tangible proof of his concept. It worked. The quadricycle was a success, but it was just the beginning. It was a prototype, a stepping stone. Henry sold it to finance his next, more ambitious project. He continued to refine his designs, building faster and more reliable vehicles. But through all this experimentation, a powerful idea began to form in his mind. He saw the automobiles of the day as expensive toys for the wealthy. They were complicated, unreliable, and out of reach for the common person. This is where Henry's true genius began to emerge. His vision wasn't just about building a car. It was about democratizing it. He saw a future where everyone, the farmer, the factory worker, the doctor, could own an automobile. A car that was simple to operate, easy to maintain, and affordable for the masses. This wasn't just a business plan. It was a deeply held conviction, born from his own humble, hard-working roots. He famously declared his ambition, a mission statement that would guide the rest of his life: "I will build a car for the great multitude." This powerful declaration set the stage for everything that was to come. It was a promise to the world and to himself. The journey from the farm to the quadricycle had been long and filled with challenges. But it had forged in Henry Ford an unshakable belief in the power of machines and a vision for a world transformed by them. He was no longer just a mechanic or an engineer. He was on the verge of becoming a revolutionary. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Henry Ford's formative years. The story is far from over. In our next chapter, we'll see how he took this bold vision and turned it into the Ford Motor Company, battling investors, competitors, and conventional thinking to create the legendary Model T. If you enjoyed this journey, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next part of this incredible story. We'll see you next time. Have you ever had a dream so big, so vivid, that it felt more real than reality itself? A dream you'd risk everything for? For a young farm boy from Michigan named Henry Ford, that dream wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was a roaring, clanking, smoke-belching obsession. Welcome back to our journey through the life of a titan. This is Chapter 3, The Dream Before Reality. Long before the world knew his name, Henry Ford was a tinkerer, a man with grease permanently under his fingernails and gears constantly turning in his mind. His fascination wasn't with the sprawling farmlands he grew up on, but with the machines that worked them. Specifically the engine. The engine was the heart of the industrial age, a source of power that was changing the world. And Henry wanted to build his own. His first workshop wasn't a state-of-the-art facility. It was a humble brick shed behind his house at 58 Bagley Avenue in Detroit. While most of his neighbors were settling in for the night, a light would be burning in that shed. Night after night, Henry would be hunched over a collection of scrap metal, pipes, and wires. His wife, Clara, was his staunchest supporter. She'd bring him hot tea, holding a lamp so he could see, watching as he tried to bring his mechanical vision to life. He started small. His first attempts were experiments on the kitchen sink. Using a simple design, he managed to get a small 1-cylinder gasoline engine sputtering to life. It was a crude device, but to Henry, the sound of that engine popping and hissing was the sweetest music. It was proof. Proof that he could harness the power of a controlled explosion and turn it into motion. This small success fueled a much bigger ambition. He wasn't just dreaming of an engine anymore. He was dreaming of a carriage that could move without a horse. For 2 years, he toiled. Every spare moment, every spare dollar went into his project. He'd scavenge parts wherever he could find them. The engine itself was made from the scrap pipe of a steam engine. The flywheel he machined himself. He used 4 bicycle wheels, which gave the contraption its name. By 1896, it was ready. He called it the quadricycle. Imagine the scene. It's the middle of the night on a quiet Detroit street. A strange, skeletal machine sits in a brick shed. It has a simple wooden frame, 2 bicycle seats, a tiller for steering, and that little 2-cylinder engine mounted in the back. Henry is about to test it for the first time, but there's a problem. A big one. In all his meticulous planning, he'd forgotten one crucial detail. He'd built his quadricycle inside the shed, and the machine was wider than the doorway. A lesser man might have given up, defeated by such a simple, frustrating oversight. But not Henry Ford. He grabbed a pickaxe. With a mix of adrenaline and sheer determination, he started smashing down the brick wall of his own shed, creating an opening big enough to wheel his creation out into the alley. In the early hours of June 4, 1896, with his friend Jim Bishop cycling ahead to clear the way, Henry Ford started the engine. It sputtered, coughed, and then, with a lurch, the quadricycle rolled forward under its own power. He drove it around the block, a triumphant, noisy journey that announced the arrival of a new era. That first ride wasn't just a test. It was a declaration. The dream was becoming real. The quadricycle was a sensation. People would gather just to see this horseless carriage. This initial success gave Ford the confidence to seek out investors. He needed capital to move from a backyard project to a real manufacturing enterprise. He found a group of Detroit businessmen, including the city's mayor, William C. Mayberry, who were impressed by his creation. With their backing, he founded his first company in 1899, the Detroit Automobile Company. This should have been the triumphant next chapter. The dream was funded, the factory was ready. But reality has a funny way of interfering with dreams. Ford wasn't a businessman, he was an engineer. He was obsessed with perfecting the design, constantly tinkering, trying to make the car better, lighter, more reliable. His investors, however, wanted to see a return on their money. They wanted cars rolling off the assembly line and into the hands of customers. Ford's relentless perfectionism clashed with the commercial demands of his backers. He was slow to produce a sellable product. While he was refining his designs, the company was hemorrhaging money. The investors grew impatient. After producing only a handful of vehicles, the Detroit Automobile Company was dissolved in 1901. It was a failure. Henry Ford, the man who had wowed the city with his quadricycle, was now out of a job, his first venture in ruins. Many people would have quit then. They would have gone back to a steady job, chalking up the experience as a youthful folly. But for Henry Ford, failure was just another part of the process. He believed in his vision with an almost religious fervor. He famously said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." He didn't see the end of his company. He saw a lesson. He learned that he needed more than just a good design. He needed the right partners and full control over his engineering vision. He didn't waste time wallowing in defeat. To restore his reputation and attract new investors, he did something incredibly bold. He decided to build a race car. In the early 1900s, automobile racing was the ultimate marketing tool. It was a public spectacle that proved a car's speed, power, and, most importantly, its reliability. Ford designed a monstrous machine he called the Sweepstakes. It had a massive engine, but it was raw and untested. In October 1901, Ford faced off against Alexander Winton, who was at the time the most famous and successful race car driver and manufacturer in America. On paper, Ford stood no chance. He was the underdog, the failed businessman. But on the Grosse Pointe racetrack, something incredible happened. Ford, who had never raced before, drove with fearless determination. He held on as his machine bucked and roared, eventually overtaking Winton to win the race. The victory was electrifying. It put Henry Ford's name back in the headlines. It proved that he could build powerful, reliable engines. This win attracted a new set of backers, and in 1901 he formed his second company, the Henry Ford Company. But history, it seems, has a tendency to repeat itself. Once again, Ford clashed with his financial backers. They brought in an outside consultant, a man named Henry Leland, to oversee production. Ford, who valued his independence above all else, couldn't stand the interference. In 1902, after just a few months, he walked away from the company that bore his own name, taking a small settlement with him. So here he was, for the second time, on the outside looking in. The company he had just left would be reorganized by Henry Leland and renamed. Its new name? The Cadillac Automobile Company. Think about that. The foundation of one of the world's most prestigious luxury car brands was built from the ashes of Henry Ford's second failure. Twice he had tried, and twice he had failed. He had the vision, the engineering skill, and the relentless drive. But he had not yet found the right combination of capital and control. These failures were brutal, public, and discouraging. Yet they were the most important education he would ever receive. They forged in him an unbreakable will and a crucial understanding. To make his dream a reality, he couldn't just be the engineer. He had to be the master of his own destiny. This period of struggle, of building and failing, of winning and walking away, was the crucible that shaped the man who would eventually put the world on wheels. The dream of an affordable, reliable car for the common person was still alive in his mind, burning brighter than ever. He just needed one more chance. His perseverance, born from the lessons of these early disappointments, was about to bear fruit in a way that no one, not even Henry Ford himself, could have possibly imagined. And that story is where we're headed next. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. If you're enjoying this journey into the mind of a revolutionary, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. We'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to our series on the Titans of Industry. Today, we're diving into a story of resilience, innovation, and a vision that would change the world forever. This is Chapter 4, The Birth of the Ford Motor Company. Picture this. It's 1903. The world is on the cusp of a revolution, but the path forward is anything but clear. The automobile is a novelty, a toy for the wealthy, and the landscape is crowded with ambitious inventors and fleeting companies. Henry Ford had already faced 2 business failures. His Detroit Automobile Company had dissolved, and the Henry Ford Company had been reorganized into Cadillac after he left. Many would have given up, but Henry's vision was unshakable. He wasn't just trying to build a car. He was trying to build the asterisk car, a car for the great multitude. So, on June 16, 1903, with just $28,000 in cash from 12 investors, including the Dodge brothers who would later become his rivals, the Ford Motor Company was incorporated. This wasn't some grand corporate launch. It was a modest operation in a small converted wagon factory on Mack Avenue in Detroit. With a small team of dedicated workers, they set out to defy the odds. The stakes were incredibly high. In these early days of the automotive age, hundreds of companies would spring up, only to vanish just as quickly. Survival was the exception, not the rule. Their first creation was the Model A. Don't confuse this with the famous successor to the Model T. This was their very first offering. On July 15, 1903, the company received its first order from a Chicago dentist, Dr. Ernst Fenning. This sale was a lifeline. The company's bank balance had dwindled to just over $200. That first Model A, sold for $850, wasn't just a car. It was proof that their dream was viable. It was a simple 2-cylinder machine, often called the Fordmobile, and it represented the core of Henry's philosophy. But the path to success wasn't a straight line from the model. The early years were a flurry of experimentation. Ford and his team raced through the alphabet, developing a series of prototypes and models. There was the Model B, a more upscale touring car, the Model C, an updated version of the A, and the ambitious 6-cylinder Model K. However, Henry Ford personally disliked the Model K. It went against his core belief. He saw the future not in catering to the rich, but in empowering the masses. He argued constantly with his business partner and financial backer, Alexander Malcolmson, who favored the high-profit, high-end models. This clash of visions defined the company's early struggles. While other automakers were focused on building bigger, faster, and more luxurious machines for an elite clientele, Ford was obsessed with a different set of principles. His mantra was simple: simplicity, reliability, and affordability. He believed a car should be easy to operate, easy to fix, and priced so that the average American family could own one. He saw the automobile not as a status symbol, but as a tool for freedom and connection. It could liberate rural families from isolation, connect towns, and create a more mobile, unified nation. Every design choice, every production method he explored, was aimed at this singular goal. This relentless focus on a people's car put him in direct competition with dozens, if not hundreds, of other small automakers. Companies like Oldsmobile, Buick, and Rambler were all vying for a piece of this new, explosive market. The industry was a chaotic free-for-all, with no standards and fierce patent battles. The most significant of these was the fight over the Selden patent, where an association claimed a master patent on all gasoline-powered automobiles. While most automakers paid the licensing fees, Ford refused. He saw it as a stranglehold on innovation and fought it in court for years. This legal battle wasn't just about money. It was a fight for the freedom to innovate and to build cars his way. This period of intense competition and internal conflict was a crucible for Henry Ford. The relative failure of the expensive Model K only strengthened his conviction. He knew that to truly succeed, to truly change the world, he had to break away from the conventional thinking of the time. He had to build a car that was tough enough for rough country roads, simple enough for a farmer to maintain, and cheap enough for a factory worker to buy. The lessons learned from the models A, B, C, and the problematic K were all stepping stones. Each success and failure brought his vision into sharper focus. He was consolidating his control over the company, buying out investors like Malcolmson who didn't share his dream. He was clearing the deck, preparing for a single revolutionary product that would consolidate all his ideas. This insistence on a simple, reliable, and affordable car was more than just a business strategy. It was a philosophy that would ultimately lead to the assembly line, the $5 workday, and the car that put the world on wheels. The birth of the Ford Motor Company wasn't just the start of another business, it was the beginning of a new era. The groundwork was laid, the vision was clear, and the stage was set for the arrival of a car that would become a legend. The Model T. Thank you so much for joining me on this part of our journey. The story is just getting started, and the next chapter is one you won't want to miss. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you're notified when we release our next video. We'll see you next time. Hello and welcome back to our series. In the last chapter, we saw the birth of the Ford Motor Company, a venture born from persistence and a refusal to give up. But what truly set Henry Ford apart wasn't just his ability to build a car. It was his revolutionary vision for what a car could be. Today, in Chapter 5, we delve into that vision, a car for the great multitude. At the dawn of the 20th century, the automobile was a toy for the rich. It was a handcrafted luxury, a status symbol that prowled the cobblestone streets of wealthy neighborhoods, far removed from the lives of ordinary people. They were complex, unreliable, and prohibitively expensive. The average factory worker, earning a few dollars a day, could sooner dream of owning a private yacht than one of these newfangled horseless carriages. Most people assumed this was simply the way things were. Cars were for the elite. The horse and buggy were for everyone else. But Henry Ford saw things differently. Standing in his workshop, surrounded by gears and grease, he didn't just see a machine. He saw a tool for liberation. He imagined a world where the farmer wasn't isolated by miles of muddy roads, where a doctor could reach a patient in minutes instead of hours, and where a family could escape the city on a Sunday afternoon to see the countryside. He saw a world where distance no longer dictated destiny, and the key to unlocking this world? A car that anyone could afford. This wasn't just a business strategy. It was a deeply personal, almost obsessive mission. Ford articulated it with simple, powerful clarity. He wanted to build a car for the great multitude. He envisioned a vehicle so low in price that any man with a good salary would be able to own one and enjoy with his family the blessing of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces. This was a radical, almost ludicrous idea at the time. It flew in the face of all conventional business wisdom. The established logic was to build expensive cars for high profit margins. Ford wanted to do the exact opposite. Build a cheap car for razor-thin margins, but sell millions of them. Imagine being one of his early investors. You've put your capital into this new automobile company, and the founder comes to you, not with a plan to court the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers, but to sell to the very men working on his factory floor. The skepticism was immense. His own partners, men like Alexander Malcolmson, had joined the venture with the expectation of building powerful, profitable cars for the existing luxury market. They couldn't understand Ford's obsession with a farmer's car. Henry, they'd argue, the money is in the big, powerful models. Why waste our time and resources on a cheap runabout? Who will even buy it? They saw it as a distraction, a drain on the company's potential. Engineers, too, were baffled. They were trained to think in terms of performance, elegance, and complexity. Building the best car meant adding more features, using more expensive materials, and showcasing intricate craftsmanship. Ford was asking them to do the opposite, to simplify, to strip away, to design for cost-effectiveness above all else. Ford's response was unwavering. He wasn't just stubborn. He had a profound belief in the power of the American worker as a consumer. He understood something his backers didn't. A new middle class was emerging, and they had aspirations. They wanted a piece of the modern world. If you could provide them with a reliable, affordable product, they would buy it. He argued that their potential market wasn't the few thousand wealthy families in America, but the millions of working families who had never even considered owning a car. "We're going to democratize the automobile," he would declare. Convincing his team required more than just impassioned speeches. It required a fundamental shift in thinking. Ford knew his car for the multitude couldn't be built using the old methods. A cheap car couldn't just be a shoddier version of an expensive one. It had to be reconceived from the ground up, with one guiding principle: efficiency. Every single part, every single process, every single bolt had to be designed with cost and simplicity in mind. This wasn't about cutting corners in a way that compromised the vehicle's integrity. On the contrary, Ford believed simplicity led to reliability. Fewer parts meant fewer things could break. A simpler design meant repairs could be made easily, even by the owner themselves with a basic set of tools. He began to challenge his engineers with relentless questions. Does it need to be this shape? Can we make this part from a cheaper, stronger material? Can we design this so that one worker can assemble it in half the time? He championed the use of new materials, like lightweight but incredibly strong vanadium steel, which he had first seen in the wreckage of a French race car. While it was initially more expensive, Ford calculated that its strength would allow him to use smaller, lighter parts, ultimately saving weight and cost throughout the entire vehicle. This was a holistic approach to design. He wasn't just thinking about the cost of a single component. He was thinking about how that component affected the entire system, from the supply chain to the final assembly line to the eventual repair bill for the customer. This vision was the seed of the assembly line, the $5 workday, and the entire manufacturing revolution that was to come. It all started here, with this seemingly simple but earth-shatteringly radical idea. Ford wasn't just trying to build a new car. He was trying to build a new world. A world where mobility wasn't a privilege, but a right. A world where the average family could own a piece of the future. The design table and the drafting boards in his factory were not just blueprints for a machine. They were the blueprints for 20th century society. His investors remained skeptical, and the internal battles were far from over. But Henry Ford had planted his flag. The mission was clear, the design philosophy was set. The next step was to turn this grand, audacious vision into a tangible, metal and rubber reality. He needed a name for this car, a symbol for his revolution. He would call it the Model T. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter. The story is just getting started, and the creation of the Model T will change everything. If you're enjoying this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. We truly appreciate your support. See you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our journey through the life of Henry Ford. In our last episode, we saw Ford's early triumphs and tribulations as he navigated the fledgling automotive industry. Now we arrive at a moment that will not only define his legacy, but will forever change the face of America and the world. This is the story of a car so revolutionary, so perfectly conceived for its time, that it put the world on wheels. This is the story of the Model T. The year is 1908. Imagine a world without paved highways, where roads were often little more than muddy, rutted tracks. Cars were a luxury, expensive toys for the wealthy, often unreliable and complex. For the average American family, especially those in rural areas, a personal automobile was as distant a dream as a trip to the moon. Henry Ford saw this landscape not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. He had a vision to build a car for the great multitude. A car so simple, so affordable, and so dependable that any person with a decent salary could own one. On October 1st, 1908, that vision rolled out of the Ford Piquette Avenue plant in Detroit and into history. It was the Ford Model T, affectionately nicknamed the Tin Lizzie. It wasn't the fastest or the most luxurious car on the market. It wasn't designed to be. It was designed to be something far more important: practical. Henry Ford's philosophy was crystal clear. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. He instructed his team to create a vehicle with every part designed and manufactured for strength, simplicity, and low cost. Let's break down the genius of its design. First, durability. The Model T was built with a special kind of steel, a vanadium steel alloy, which was much stronger and lighter than the steel used by other car manufacturers at the time. Ford had seen this metal used in the wreckage of a French race car and immediately understood its potential. This made the Model T incredibly resilient, able to withstand the brutal conditions of early American roads. It could take a beating and keep on going, a quality that earned it the trust of farmers, doctors, and traveling salesmen alike. Then there was the simplicity of its mechanics. Ford believed that the owner of a car should be able to repair it themselves. In an era where a train mechanic could be hundreds of miles away, this was a revolutionary concept. The Model T's engine was a straightforward 20-horsepower four-cylinder unit. It was easy to understand, easy to access, and easy to fix. Owners often used basic tools they already had, hammers, pliers, and baling wire to make roadside repairs. This self-sufficiency was a core part of the car's appeal, empowering owners and making the automobile a practical tool rather than a complicated liability. One of the most brilliant and often overlooked features of the Model T was its high ground clearance. The chassis sat high off the ground, allowing the car to navigate the deep ruts, mud holes, and uneven terrain that defined rural roads. While other cars would get stuck or have their undercarriages damaged, the Tin Lizzie would simply rumble on through. It was as if it was designed specifically for the American countryside, which, of course, it was. This made it the perfect vehicle for farmers who needed to get their goods to market, for doctors making house calls in remote areas, and for families wanting to visit relatives in the next town over. The Model T wasn't just a car. It was a bridge connecting isolated communities. Think about the control system, which was also unique. It had 3 foot pedals and a hand lever. One pedal was for the clutch, another for the reverse gear, and the third was the brake. The throttle was controlled by a lever on the steering column. It was unconventional, even for the time, but once you learned it, it was said to be quite intuitive. This system, combined with its rugged construction, made the Model T remarkably versatile. People didn't just drive their Model Ts. They used them. Farmers would jack up the rear axle, remove a tire, and attach a belt to the spinning hub to power saws, water pumps, and other farm machinery. The car became an all-purpose power source, a mechanical workhorse for the modern age. The impact was immediate and profound. In its first year, over 10,000 Model Ts were sold, a remarkable number for the time. But this was just the beginning. The car was a hit because it solved real-world problems. It offered freedom and mobility to a population that had never known it. Before the Model T, a family's world might be limited to a radius of a few miles, the distance they could travel by horse and buggy in a day. Suddenly, with the Model T, their world expanded exponentially. Trips that took days now took hours. The isolation of rural life began to dissolve. Ford's initial offering of the Model T came in a few different colors, but he was already thinking about the next step in his master plan: mass production. He knew that to make the car even more affordable, he had to make its production even more efficient. The Model T was the perfect vehicle for this experiment. Its design, with standardized interchangeable parts, was the foundation upon which the moving assembly line would be built just a few years later. The car and the production method were two sides of the same revolutionary coin. So as we close this chapter, let's appreciate the Model T for what it truly was. It wasn't just a machine of steel, rubber, and glass. It was a catalyst for social change. It was the physical embodiment of Henry Ford's democratic vision of technology. By creating a simple, durable, and repairable car designed specifically for the challenges of its environment, Ford didn't just launch a successful product. He launched a new era of personal mobility. The Model T wasn't just the perfect car for America's early 20th century landscape. It was the car that would reshape that landscape forever. In our next episode, we will dive into the innovation that made the Model T a global phenomenon: the moving assembly line. The price of the car would plummet, production would skyrocket, and the world would never be the same. Thanks so much for joining me on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. See you next time. Welcome back to our series, where we dive deep into the stories behind the world's greatest innovations. Today, we're exploring Chapter 7, The Magic of Simplicity, and what better example is there than the legendary Ford Model T. This wasn't just a car. It was a revolution on wheels, and its secret weapon was its breathtaking simplicity. So, buckle up as we journey back in time to understand how less truly became more. Before the Model T rolled onto the scene in 1908, cars were a rich person's game. They were complex, unreliable, and custom-built, making them outrageously expensive and a nightmare to repair. If something broke, you couldn't just pop down to the local store for a spare part. You needed a skilled machinist to fabricate a new one from scratch. Henry Ford saw this and thought, there has to be a better way. He envisioned a car for the great multitude. A car so simple and affordable that the average American family could own one. This vision wasn't just about building another automobile. It was about changing society itself. And the key to unlocking this future was a radical commitment to simplicity in design. So why did the Model T's design work so incredibly well? It all starts with the core principle of reducing complexity. Ford and his engineers were obsessed with eliminating every non-essential component. They asked themselves, does this part absolutely need to be here? Can we make it do more than one job? This relentless pursuit of minimalism led to a vehicle with far fewer moving parts than its contemporaries. Think about it, fewer parts mean fewer things that can break. Fewer things to manufacture, and fewer things for a mechanic or even the owner to worry about. The engine, for instance, was a masterpiece of straightforward engineering. It was a 4-cylinder 20-horsepower unit, but its design was clean and accessible. It didn't have a fuel pump. Instead, it used a simple gravity feed system from a tank mounted under the front seat. No water pump either. It relied on a thermosiphon cooling system, where hot water naturally rises and cooler water sinks. It was elegant, effective, and brilliantly simple. This reduction in components wasn't just about saving money. It was about creating a car that was fundamentally more reliable and easier to understand. For a farmer in rural America, miles from the nearest mechanic, this was a game changer. They could often diagnose and fix problems themselves with a basic set of tools. The Model T wasn't just a vehicle. It was an empowering piece of technology. Another stroke of genius was the use of standardized interchangeable components. This was a concept Ford had perfected with his moving assembly line, but its power was rooted in the design of the car itself. Every single Model T part was made to the exact same specification. A wheel from a 1915 Model T would fit perfectly on a 1925 model. A fender, a spark plug, a steering wheel, they were all identical. This was a revolutionary departure from the bespoke, one-off nature of early car manufacturing. What did this mean for the customer? It meant that repairs were fast and cheap. You could order a part from a catalog or buy it from a local Ford dealer and know with absolute certainty that it would fit. This network of easily available, affordable parts created an ecosystem of support that made owning a car practical for the first time. It transformed the automobile from a fragile curiosity into a dependable tool for everyday life. This standardization was the backbone of mass production and made the Model T's low price point possible. By producing millions of identical parts, Ford could leverage economies of scale that no other manufacturer could even dream of. Simplicity in design led to simplicity in manufacturing, which in turn led to an affordable and easily maintainable product for the masses. Now, a simple car doesn't mean a weak car. The Model T had to be tough. It had to withstand the terrible roads of the early 20th century, which were often little more than rutted dirt tracks. Ford's solution was another innovation, the use of vanadium steel. This was a lightweight yet incredibly strong steel alloy that wasn't widely used in the auto industry at the time. Ford saw its potential and used it to create a frame that was both light and remarkably durable. The car's high ground clearance and flexible suspension system allowed it to navigate rough terrain that would leave other, heavier cars stranded. People used to joke that you could drive a Model T almost anywhere except up a tree, and there was a lot of truth to that. It became the go-to vehicle for farmers, doctors, and traveling salesmen who needed to get to remote places. Its lightweight design also meant it was more fuel efficient and less likely to get stuck in the mud. So the simplicity wasn't a compromise on quality. It was a carefully engineered choice that resulted in a vehicle perfectly suited for its environment. The combination of a simple engine, standardized parts, and a tough-as-nails frame created a car that was, for its time, the ultimate all-terrain vehicle. Finally, let's talk about that famous quote. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black. This line perfectly encapsulates Ford's philosophy. While it sounds restrictive, it was actually a masterstroke of efficiency. From 1914 to 1925, the Model T was indeed available only in black. Why? Because the specific type of black paint used at the time, called Japan Black, was the only color that would dry fast enough to keep up with the relentless pace of the assembly line. A car would roll off the line every few minutes, and Ford couldn't afford to have them sitting around waiting for paint to dry. Limiting the color choice to one eliminated a huge variable in the production process. It simplified inventory, streamlined the painting process, and cut costs dramatically. This decision, which seems so anti-consumer by today's standards, was crucial to achieving the ultimate goal, making the car as affordable as possible. By sacrificing choice in color, Ford was able to give millions of people the choice of personal mobility. It was a trade-off that the public was more than willing to make. The stark, uniform black of the Model T became a symbol not of limitation, but of democratic access to technology. It was the color of progress. In the end, the success of the Ford Model T is a powerful lesson in the magic of simplicity. By focusing on the essentials, eliminating complexity, standardizing components, and making smart material choices, Henry Ford didn't just build a successful car. He built the car that put the world on wheels. He proved that great design isn't about adding more features. It's about taking away everything that isn't necessary to create something that is pure, functional, and accessible to everyone. The legacy of the Model T isn't just in museums. It's in the fundamental principles of mass production and user-focused design that still shape our world today. Thank you so much for joining me on this look back at the incredible story of the Model T. If you enjoyed this journey into the magic of simplicity, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the history of innovation. We'd love to have you with us. Until next time, stay curious. In our last chapter, we witnessed the birth of a revolutionary idea. A vehicle designed not just for the wealthy, but for every family across the nation. Today, in Chapter 8, we dive into the exhilarating story of its early success. A period where a simple machine began to reshape the very fabric of American life. The moment it rolled off the assembly line, it was clear this wasn't just another car. It was an instant sensation. Imagine the scene, a time when horses still dominated the roads, and suddenly, this sturdy, reliable, and, most importantly, affordable automobile appeared. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. It wasn't just a purchase, it was an event. Newspapers buzzed, and soon the buzz turned into a roar. The initial wave of enthusiasm wasn't centered in the bustling, cosmopolitan cities as you might expect. Instead, the real revolution started in the heartland. Rural families, who had been isolated for generations by distance and muddy roads, saw this car as a lifeline. For them, it wasn't a luxury. It was a tool for liberation. A trip to town that once took an entire day by horse and buggy could now be done in a couple of hours. This meant better access to markets for their crops, quicker trips to the doctor, and the simple, profound ability to visit relatives in the next county. Small-town workers also flocked to this new machine. The blacksmith, the carpenter, the general store owner, they all saw its potential. It wasn't just for Sunday drives, it was a workhorse. It could haul tools, transport goods, and expand their service areas exponentially. Suddenly, a craftsman wasn't limited to his immediate neighborhood. His skills and products could reach a much wider audience. This newfound mobility sparked local economies and created opportunities that simply hadn't existed before. It was the democratization of transport, and it was happening on Main Street, USA. In an era long before social media and television advertising, the most powerful marketing tool was word of mouth, and boy, did the word spread. A farmer in Ohio would tell his neighbor about his incredible new automobile. That neighbor would tell his cousin in Indiana, who would then write to his brother in Nebraska. Letters filled with awe and excitement crossed the country, describing how this car could navigate rugged terrain, how easy it was to maintain, and how it had fundamentally changed their daily lives. These personal testimonials were far more convincing than any advertisement. They were genuine, heartfelt, and relatable. People trusted the experiences of their friends and family. A story from a trusted source about conquering a muddy road after a storm or making it to a family emergency in record time carried immense weight. This organic grassroots marketing campaign created a tidal wave of demand that swept from the East Coast to the West. The car became a symbol of progress and practicality, a topic of conversation around dinner tables and in general stores across America. Back at the factory, the sheer scale of this success was beginning to dawn on the engineers and managers. The initial production targets, which had seemed ambitious at the time, were quickly being dwarfed by the flood of incoming orders. The assembly lines, which were already innovative, were now under immense pressure to increase their output without sacrificing the quality that had made the car so popular in the first place. The challenge was monumental. Production began to outpace even the most optimistic expectations. The factory floors were a hive of activity, a symphony of machinery and human effort working in concert. Every finished car that rolled out was already spoken for, destined for a dealership where eager customers were waiting, often with cash in hand. The company wasn't just building cars. It was fueling a national phenomenon. The demand was so intense that the production team had to constantly innovate, streamline, and expand their operations just to keep up. This wasn't just a successful product launch. It was a cultural shift happening in real time. The car was weaving itself into the American dream. It represented freedom, opportunity, and the promise of a better, more connected future. For the first time, the average American family could aspire to own a piece of modern technology that would radically improve their lives. The price was right, the timing was perfect, and the nation was ready. Think about the psychological impact. Owning one of these cars meant you were part of something new and exciting. It was a status symbol, not of wealth, but of forward thinking and practicality. It was a declaration that you were embracing the 20th century and all the possibilities it held. The early success wasn't just measured in sales figures. It was measured in the miles of new roads being traveled, the family reunions made possible, and the countless small businesses that could now thrive. This period laid the foundation for everything that was to come. The overwhelming demand forced the company to refine its manufacturing processes, leading to even greater efficiencies and eventually even lower prices. The success story that began in rural towns and on dusty farm roads would soon grow into a global empire. But it all started here, with this initial, explosive burst of popularity. The word was out, the wheels were turning, and America was hitting the road. As production ramped up to unprecedented levels, the company faced a new set of challenges and opportunities. How would they continue to meet this insatiable demand? What innovations would be necessary to stay ahead? The early success was just the beginning of the story. In our next chapter, we will explore how the company responded to this incredible momentum, pushing the boundaries of mass production and forever changing the face of industry. The revolution was in full swing, and it was just getting started. Thank you so much for joining us for this chapter of our journey. It's truly amazing to see how one brilliant idea, when met with the right moment in history, can create such a powerful wave of change. If you enjoyed this story and want to see what happens next, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next episode. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious. Hello and welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into a moment that didn't just change a company, but reshaped the very fabric of our modern world. This is Chapter 9, the birth of the moving assembly line. Picture this, the early 20th century. The automobile is a luxury item painstakingly built by skilled craftsmen. It takes over 12 hours to assemble a single Ford Model T. Henry Ford, a man driven by a vision of making cars accessible to everyone, knew this had to change. But the solution wasn't born in an auto plant. It came from a rather unlikely source. Ford was a keen observer. He looked at other industries, searching for inspiration. He found it in the continuous flow processes of Chicago's meatpacking plants and the mechanized grain mills of the Midwest. In the meatpacking districts, carcasses were hung on hooks and moved along a trolley system. As they passed, workers at fixed stations would each perform a specific cut. No one person butchered an entire animal. Instead, it was a sequence of simple, repetitive tasks. Similarly, grain mills used conveyor belts to move grain from one processing stage to the next, a river of raw material flowing through the factory. This was the spark. Ford saw the principle. Instead of bringing workers to the work, why not bring the work to the workers? He tasked his brilliant team of engineers, including names like William Clan, Charles Sorensen, and Clarence Avery, with a monumental challenge. Apply this concept of continuous flow to the complex task of building a car. Their initial experiments were humble, almost comical. They started small, with components like the flywheel magneto. Originally, one worker would build a magneto from start to finish in about 20 minutes. The team broke down the process into 29 distinct steps and laid the parts out on a long bench. Workers would perform their single task and then slide the component to the next person. Assembly time plummeted to just 13 minutes. Encouraged, they refined it further, adding a simple moving belt. The time dropped to 5 minutes. It was a revelation. The core principle was specialization of labor taken to an extreme. Each worker was trained to do one simple, repeatable task. One person might tighten a specific set of bolts. The next would install a single part. The next would connect a particular wire. They didn't need to be master mechanics. They needed to be masters of their single, simple motion. This dramatically reduced training time and minimized the potential for errors. The worker didn't have to walk around, bend over to pick up tools, or consult complicated blueprints. The work came to them at waist height, ready for their specific action. The ultimate test, of course, was the chassis itself, the car skeleton. In 1913, at the Highland Park plant, they set up the first crude chassis assembly line. It was nothing more than a rope, a winch, and some guides on the floor. A bare frame was attached to the rope and slowly dragged across the factory floor, a length of 150 feet. Along this path, teams of workers stood ready, with piles of parts organized at their stations. As the chassis crawled past, they swarmed it, each man performing his designated task, attaching the axles, the engine, the steering column. The results were mind-blowing. Before the line, assembling a complete chassis took 12 hours and 8 minutes. On that first trial run with the moving rope, it took 5 hours and 50 minutes. The team was ecstatic, but they knew they could do better. They tinkered, they refined, they synchronized the delivery of parts, and they optimized the height and speed of the line. Within months, the process was so streamlined that a new Model T chassis was rolling off the assembly line in just 93 minutes. Think about that. From over 12 hours to just over an hour and a half. It was a productivity increase of nearly 800%. The factory floor, once a chaotic scene of workers moving around static car frames, transformed into a beautifully orchestrated ballet of man and machine. This wasn't just a change. It was a revolution. The moment that first chassis was dragged by a rope across the factory floor was the moment the industrial world changed forever. The principles of the moving assembly line, specialization, continuous flow, and standardization exploded beyond the walls of Ford. They became the bedrock of mass production, touching nearly every industry imaginable, from electronics to food processing. The cost savings were so immense that Ford could pass them on to the consumer. The price of the Model T plummeted, making it the first car for the common person. But this innovation also came with a social cost. The work was monotonous, physically demanding, and relentless. The worker became in some ways another cog in the machine. This would lead to new challenges like high worker turnover and the rise of labor unions, topics we will explore in our future chapters. The birth of the moving assembly line is a story of inspired observation, relentless experimentation, and a radical rethinking of how things are made. It's the story of how Henry Ford and his team didn't just build a better car. They built a better way to build, and in doing so, they created the template for the modern industrial age. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. It's a pivotal moment in history, and I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the Titans of Industry. Today we're diving into a moment that didn't just change a company, but changed the world as we know it. We're talking about Chapter 10 in the great book of industrial history, Mass Production Perfected. This is the story of how Henry Ford and his team took a revolutionary idea and sharpened it to a razor's edge, creating a system that would define the 20th century. Before this era, building a car was a craftsman's job. It was slow, meticulous, and expensive. Imagine, a single Model T took over 12 hours to assemble. 12 hours. That's more than a full workday for one single vehicle. It was a process that, while effective, inherently limited the number of cars that could be produced and kept the price tag high, far out of reach for the average family. Ford had a vision of a car for the great multitude, but to achieve that, he needed to shatter the old way of doing things. He knew that to make cars affordable, he had to make them faster. Much, much faster. The breakthrough came with the refinement of the moving assembly line. It sounds simple now, but back then it was a radical concept. Instead of workers moving around a stationary car, the car moved past the workers. Each person had one specific, simple task to perform. This was the dawn of a new kind of specialization. Think of it like a perfectly choreographed dance. The chassis would start at one end of the factory, and as it glided down the line, hundreds of workers, each a master of their single task, would add a part. One person installs the magneto, the next the engine block, the next the wheels, over and over and over again. The results of this new system were nothing short of astonishing. The assembly time for a Model T plummeted. What once took 12 laborious hours was slashed to just 90 minutes. Let that sink in. A 12-hour process condensed into the time it takes to watch a movie. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a complete reinvention of manufacturing. The efficiency gains were almost unbelievable. Ford's factories began churning out cars at a rate the world had never seen. This wasn't just about building cars faster. It was about building a new future, one where the automobile was no longer a luxury, but a possibility for everyone. And what happens when you can make something that much faster? The cost plummets. This is where the magic really happens for the consumer. The original price of a Model T was around $850. Eventually, the price fell to under $300. That's less than $5,000 in today's currency. Suddenly, the dream of owning a car wasn't a dream anymore. It was a tangible, affordable reality for millions of American families. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, people from all walks of life could now afford the freedom and mobility that a personal automobile offered. Ford wasn't just selling a car. He was selling independence. He was selling the ability to visit family in the next town, to take goods to a new market, to explore the country. This price drop democratized the automobile and redrew the map of American society. It was the key that unlocked the modern consumer economy. What Ford and his team created wasn't just a better way to build a car. It was the first true modern production model. This was the blueprint, the gold standard that countless other industries would look to for inspiration. The principles were universal: specialization of labor, a moving assembly line, and a relentless focus on efficiency to drive down costs. The system was so effective that it became known simply as Fordism. It was a new industrial philosophy, a paradigm shift that valued volume and affordability above all else. This model proved that you could produce high-quality, complex products for a mass market without sacrificing reliability. In fact, the standardization inherent in the assembly line often led to more consistent quality than the old hand-built methods. Every Model T that rolled off the line was, for all intents and purposes, identical to the one before it and the one after it. This consistency was a revolution in itself. Consumers knew exactly what they were getting, and manufacturers knew exactly how to produce it at an incredible scale. This was the birth of the modern factory as we know it. The impact of Ford's perfected assembly line was unconfined to the walls of his factories or even the auto industry. It sent a massive ripple effect across industries worldwide. Think about it. Manufacturers of everything from household appliances to radios to furniture saw what Ford had done and thought, "We can do that too." The principles of mass production were adapted to create washing machines, refrigerators, and countless other goods that we now consider commonplace. The result was the birth of the modern consumer society. This new way of manufacturing created a surge in demand for raw materials like steel, rubber, and glass, boosting those industries. It created new jobs, not just in factories, but in service stations, motels, and diners that sprang up along newly paved roads. The world literally began to reconfigure itself around the automobile and the products of mass production. This wasn't just an American phenomenon. Industrialists and leaders from Europe, Japan, and around the globe traveled to Detroit to witness the miracle of the assembly line firsthand. They took these lessons back to their home countries, sparking industrial transformations on a global scale. The echo of that 90-minute assembly process in Dearborn, Michigan, is still heard today in factories all over the planet. It was the moment that put the mass in mass production and set the stage for the century of progress that followed. And that's a wrap on one of the most pivotal chapters in industrial history. The perfection of mass production wasn't just about building cars, it was about building the modern world. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey today. If you enjoyed this deep dive and want to learn more, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next episode. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series where we dive deep into the pivotal moments that shaped our modern world. Today, we're journeying back to the early 20th century to witness a decision so radical, so audacious that it didn't just change a company, it reshaped the very fabric of American society. We're talking about Henry Ford's revolutionary $5 workday. Picture this, it's 1913. The Ford Motor Company is a titan of industry, pumping out Model Ts at an unprecedented rate, thanks to the moving assembly line. But behind the scenes, there's a huge problem brewing. The work is monotonous, grueling, and relentless. The noise is deafening, the pace is exhausting, and the turnover rate for workers is astronomical. To keep the factory staffed, Ford had to hire over 52. Then, on January 5, 1914, Henry Ford and his vice president, James Cousins, made an announcement that sent shockwaves across the globe. Ford was more than doubling the average daily wage for its male factory workers, from about $2.34 to a flat $5. This wasn't just a pay raise. It was an economic earthquake. At the time, this was an unheard-of sum for industrial labor. Critics were stunned. The Wall Street Journal called the plan an economic crime, and fellow industrialists predicted Ford's imminent bankruptcy. They saw it as a reckless act of charity that would destroy the competitive landscape. But Ford wasn't a philanthropist in the traditional sense. He was a pragmatic and perhaps visionary businessman, so why did he do it? The primary driver was to solve that massive turnover problem. Ford calculated that the constant hiring and training was costing him more than this bold pay increase would. He needed a stable, reliable, and dedicated workforce to keep his assembly lines running at peak efficiency. The $5 day was a strategic move to attract and retain the best workers. And attract them it did. The day after the announcement, an estimated 10,000 men flocked to the Ford factory gates in Highland Park, Michigan, braving the frigid January cold, all desperate for a chance at this life-changing wage. The crowd grew so large and unruly that the company had to turn fire hoses on them to disperse them. The $5 day instantly created a loyal labor pool. But the genius of the plan went far beyond just stabilizing the workforce. The effects were immediate and profound. That staggering 370% turnover rate from 1913 plummeted to just 16% by 1915. Absenteeism dropped dramatically. With a stable and experienced workforce, productivity soared. The quality of the cars improved because the workers were more focused and invested in their jobs. The $5 day wasn't an expense. It was an investment that paid for itself many times over in increased efficiency and output. Ford's profits didn't shrink. They doubled from $30 million to $60 million within 2 years. However, there was a catch. This wasn't just free money. The $5 rate was composed of about half wages and half profit sharing. To qualify for the full amount, workers had to meet certain standards set by Ford's newly created sociological department. This department would send investigators to the workers' homes to ensure they were living proper lives. Men had to be sober, not abuse their families, maintain a clean home, and not have boarders. For immigrants, they were strongly encouraged to learn English and become American citizens. It was a paternalistic system, to be sure, and one that would be unthinkable today. Ford was essentially trying to engineer not just a better worker, but what he considered a better citizen. While controversial for many workers, the trade-off was well worth the financial security it provided. Now, let's talk about the most transformative consequence of this policy, something that even Ford himself may not have fully anticipated. By paying his workers enough to actually buy the products they were making, he created his own customers. A Ford Model T in 1914 cost a few $100s. Suddenly, the very men who spent their days assembling these cars could realistically aspire to own one. This was a revolutionary concept. It closed the loop between production and consumption. Ford wasn't just building cars. He was building a consumer base. This simple but powerful idea became the cornerstone of a new economic era. It helped give birth to the American middle class. For the first time, a factory worker could earn enough to support a family, own a home, and purchase consumer goods that were previously considered luxuries. The $5 day set a new standard for wages across the manufacturing sector. Other companies, though initially resistant, were eventually forced to raise their wages to compete for skilled labor. This ripple effect lifted the standard of living for millions of Americans. The $5 day demonstrated a fundamental principle of mass market capitalism. A prosperous working class is essential for a thriving economy. When workers have disposable income, they spend it, which drives demand, creates more jobs, and fuels economic growth. Henry Ford, the capitalist icon, had inadvertently proven a core tenet of what would later be called Fordism, the idea that mass production is inextricably linked to mass consumption, and that both are sustained by high wages. This wasn't just an economic revolution, it was a social one. It accelerated the shift from a rural, agrarian society to an urban, industrial one. It fueled the growth of suburbs, as workers could now afford a car to commute from their homes outside the city center. It cemented the automobile's place as an essential part of American life, not just a toy for the rich. The car, in turn, created a demand for roads, gas stations, motels, and a whole new ecosystem of supporting industries, further expanding the economy. Of course, the story isn't without its complexities. Ford was a notoriously difficult and controlling figure. His anti-union stance was fierce, and the paternalism of the sociological department was deeply invasive. But we cannot deny the monumental impact of the $5 workday. It was a calculated business decision born out of necessity, but its consequences were world-changing. It stabilized an industry, boosted productivity, created a consumer class, and laid the economic foundation for the American century. It proved that investing in your workers isn't an act of charity, but one of the smartest business moves you can make. It's a lesson that resonates just as powerfully today as it did over 100 years ago. What do you think? Was Ford a visionary genius or a controlling paternalist, or perhaps both? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please give this video a thumbs up and make sure you re-subscribed so you don't miss our next chapter. We'll see you in the next one. Today we re-diving into a truly transformative chapter in American history. The era of the Model T and how it completely reshaped everyday life. Before Henry Ford's creation, the world, especially for those outside of bustling cities, was a much larger and more isolated place. But the arrival of this simple, sturdy, and affordable car changed everything. It wasn't just a machine. It was a revolution on four wheels. So, buckle up as we explore how the Tin Lizzie put America on the move and redefined the meaning of freedom. Imagine living on a farm in the early 1900s. Your world is likely confined to a few square miles. A trip to the nearest town, maybe 10 or 15 miles away, is an all-day affair by horse and buggy. You plan these trips carefully for supplies, and social visits are rare luxuries. Life is dictated by the seasons, the sun, and the endurance of your animals. This was the reality for a vast majority of Americans. The isolation was profound. News traveled slowly, opportunities were limited by distance, and the horizon often felt like the edge of the world. Then, along came the Model T suddenly. That 10-mile trip to town wasn't a day-long journey. It was a quick jaunt that took less than an hour. This was more than just convenience. It was a fundamental shift in the fabric of rural life. The Model T broke the chains of geographic isolation. Farmers could now easily sell their produce in multiple markets, fetching better prices. Their wives could visit town for social gatherings, shopping, or to see a doctor without it being a major expedition. Children in remote areas could suddenly access better schools that were previously out of reach. The car didn't just shrink distances. It expanded possibilities, bringing the outside world to the farmhouse doorstep and connecting rural families to the broader American society in a way that was previously unimaginable. It was a lifeline, a tool for commerce, and a vehicle for social connection all rolled into one. With this newfound mobility came an entirely new concept for the average family, the road trip. Before the automobile, travel for pleasure was almost exclusively the domain of the wealthy, who could afford train fares and long stays at hotels. But the Model T democratized travel. For the first time, an ordinary family could decide on a whim to pack a picnic basket, load the kids into the car, and go exploring for the day. They could visit relatives in the next county, see a state park they'd only heard about, or simply drive out into the countryside to enjoy a change of scenery. These weren't luxurious vacations. The roads were often unpaved, dusty, or muddy trails. A flat tire or several was an expected part of any journey. Families became amateur mechanics, learning to patch tires and tinker with the engine on the side of the road. But these challenges were part of the adventure. It was a shared experience, a story to tell afterward. The family road trip became a cultural institution, a rite of passage. It fostered a sense of discovery and togetherness, creating lasting memories built around the shared challenges and simple joys of the open road. These early excursions weren't just about reaching a destination. They were about the journey itself and the freedom to go wherever the road might lead. The impact of the Model T wasn't just felt by individual families. It fundamentally rewired the connections between communities. Before the car, America was a patchwork of relatively isolated towns. Each town was its own little universe, with its own general store, its own social circles, and its own distinct identity. But as more and more Model Ts rumbled down the dirt roads, those invisible walls began to crumble. Suddenly, the town 20 miles away wasn't a distant land anymore. People could drive there to attend a festival, see a different movie, or shop at a bigger store. This created a new kind of regional network. Small towns were no longer just competing with each other. They were interacting, sharing, and becoming part of a larger, interconnected community. This had a huge economic effect. Businesses now had a wider customer base, but they also had more competition. A farmer could choose to sell his goods in the town that offered the best price. A family could drive to a neighboring community for a specialized service. This interconnection spurred growth and development, leading to the demand for better roads, which in turn made travel even easier. The lonely outposts of rural America were being woven together, creating a stronger, more unified national fabric, all thanks to the humble automobile. Ultimately, the Model T became more than just a mode of transportation. It became a powerful symbol of American independence, personal freedom, and upward mobility. Owning a car meant you were no longer tied to train schedules or the limits of horse-drawn travel. You were the master of your own destiny, at least when it came to your movement. You could decide where to go and when to go there. For a young person growing up on a farm, the car represented a ticket to a wider world of possibilities, a chance to find a job in a different town, to attend college, or simply to escape the familiar confines of home for a while. This sense of autonomy was intoxicating and deeply ingrained itself in the American psyche. The automobile became an extension of the self, a declaration of one's ability to chart their own course. It embodied the promise of progress and the idea that anyone, with a little ingenuity and a reliable machine, could improve their lot in life. The Model T wasn't just a car. It was the American dream on wheels, giving millions the freedom to pursue their own horizons and shape their own lives like never before. It gave people control, choice, and a tangible sense of liberation that has defined our relationship with the automobile ever since. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the world transformed by the Model T. From breaking the isolation of rural life to pioneering the family road trip and connecting towns into a vibrant network, its impact was profound. It wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was about the freedom, the independence, and the countless new possibilities it unlocked for everyday people. The legacy of the Model T is all around us today, in our highways, our suburbs, and our enduring love for the open road. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this look back at a pivotal moment in history. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so please drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series. In the last chapter, we saw how the Model T revolutionized the automobile industry. But for Henry Ford, that was just the beginning. He wasn't just building a car. He was building an empire, a global industrial force unlike anything the world had ever seen. Today, we're diving into Chapter 13, where we'll witness the explosive expansion of the Ford Motor Company. So buckle up, because we're about to explore how one man's vision reshaped the very concept of manufacturing. The success of the Model T was staggering and demand was insatiable. Ford's Highland Park plant, the birthplace of the moving assembly line, was already a marvel of modern industry, but it was quickly becoming too small. Henry Ford's ambition couldn't be contained within a single city block. He envisioned a network of factories, not just sprinkled across America, but spanning the entire globe. The goal was simple, yet audacious: to put the world on wheels, and to do it with Ford cars built in Ford plants. This expansion began with assembly plants popping up in major cities across the United States. From Kansas City to Philadelphia, these facilities received parts shipped in kits from Detroit and assembled them for local markets. This knockdown kit system was genius. It drastically reduced shipping costs, because you could pack parts for multiple cars into the same space a single assembled car would take up. It also allowed Ford to adapt to local demands and create jobs across the country, weaving the Ford brand into the very fabric of American life. Soon, this model went international. Manchester, England, saw one of the first overseas plants, followed by facilities in France, Germany, Argentina, and even Australia. The sun, it was said, never set on the Ford empire. But even this vast network of assembly plants wasn't enough to satisfy Henry Ford's obsession with efficiency and control. He dreamt of something bigger, a single, colossal industrial complex where raw materials would enter at one end and finished automobiles would roll out the other. This dream would become the legendary River Rouge plant in Dearborn, Michigan. The Rouge, as it was known, wasn't just a factory. It was an industrial city. At its peak, it was the largest manufacturing complex in the world, employing over 100,000 people. Imagine a place so vast it had its own internal railroad with over 100 miles of track, its own fire department, and its own hospital. It was a self-contained universe dedicated to the creation of the automobile. The scale of the River Rouge plant was simply mind-boggling. Giant freighters, carrying iron ore from Ford-owned mines in the Upper Peninsula, would sail right into the complex's massive boat slip. The ore was unloaded and sent directly to the blast furnaces of the Ford steel mill. Yes, you heard that right. Ford decided he didn't want to just buy steel. He wanted to make his own. He wanted to control the quality, the quantity, and the price. The molten steel was then shaped into engine blocks, frames, and body panels, all within the same complex. It was a seamless flow of production, a ballet of heavy industry choreographed by Ford himself. Ford's quest for control, a concept we now call vertical integration, didn't stop with steel. He looked at every single component of his car and asked, why should I buy this from someone else when I can make it better and cheaper myself? So he built his own glassworks, creating a new, more durable type of glass for windshields. He purchased rubber plantations in Brazil to secure a source for tires, a massive and ambitious project that ultimately had its own set of challenges. He owned forests for the wood used in the Model T's frame and coal mines to power his factories. From the iron ore in the ground to the glass in the windshield, Henry Ford aimed to own and control every single step of the manufacturing process. This total control of the supply chain was the ultimate expression of Ford's philosophy. It was about eliminating waste, cutting out the middleman, and insulating his company from the price fluctuations and supply disruptions of outside vendors. In theory, it was the pinnacle of efficiency. If the steel mill needed more coal, the Ford-owned mines would provide it. If the assembly line needed more glass, the Ford-owned glass plant would ramp up production. Everything was interconnected, a closed-loop system designed for maximum output and minimal dependency on the outside world. The River Rouge complex was the physical manifestation of this idea, a place where raw nature was transformed into mechanical marvels through a process entirely under one man's command. This strategy gave the Ford Motor Company an immense competitive advantage. While other automakers were at the mercy of their suppliers, Ford could dictate his own terms. He could maintain his famous low price for the Model T because he controlled the cost of nearly every component that went into it. This empire-building phase cemented Ford's position not just as an automaker but as an industrial titan of unprecedented power and influence. He wasn't just in the business of making cars. He was in the business of coal, steel, glass, shipping, and logistics. However, this immense concentration of power also had its drawbacks. The very system designed for ultimate efficiency could also be rigid. As we'll see in future chapters, this reluctance to depend on outsiders would make it harder for Ford to adapt when the market began to change and customers started demanding more than just one model and one color. The very strength of his empire contained the seeds of its future challenges. Henry Ford had built a perfect system for producing the Model T, but what would happen when the world wanted something new? That's a story for next time. The scale of Ford's ambition during this era is truly something to behold. He didn't just innovate the factory floor. He tried to vertically integrate an entire global industry. It was a bold and, in many ways, brilliant strategy that defined an era of American manufacturing. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the building of the Ford Empire. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Have you ever wondered how this simple act of driving transformed the entire landscape of America? It's more than just getting from point A to point B. It's about a revolution, a complete reshaping of a nation, all powered by the internal combustion engine. This is the story of how mobility didn't just move people. It moved a country into the modern era. Welcome to our deep dive into America transformed by mobility. Before the roar of the engine became a familiar sound, America was a patchwork of isolated towns and communities. Life was local. But then, something extraordinary happened. The automobile, and specifically Henry Ford's Model T, rolled off the assembly line and into the driveways of everyday Americans. Suddenly, the horizon wasn't a limit, it was an invitation. But there was a problem. You have all these new cars, but where do you drive them? The existing roads were mostly dirt paths, designed for horses and buggies. They turned to mud in the rain and dust in the sun. It was clear, for this new age of mobility to truly take off, America needed a new kind of infrastructure. The demand for better roads became a national cry. And so began one of the most ambitious construction projects in history. This wasn't just about paving over old trails. It was a complete reimagining of the American landscape. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921 was a game-changer, providing federal funding to states to build a network of interconnected highways. Groups like the Lincoln Highway Association had already been pushing for a coast-to-coast road, a dream that was now becoming a concrete reality. Think about the sheer scale of this. Armies of workers, armed with steam shovels and graders, carved paths through mountains, stretched bridges across rivers, and laid down thousands upon thousands of miles of asphalt and concrete. These new roads, like the famous Route 66, weren't just transportation corridors. They were arteries, pumping life, commerce, and culture into the heartland of America. They connected the farms of the Midwest to the markets of the East Coast, the factories of the North to the growing cities of the West. America was literally being stitched together, 1 mile of pavement at a time. With millions of Americans hitting the road, a whole new ecosystem of businesses popped up seemingly overnight to serve them. The car was a thirsty machine, and the first gas stations began to appear. They weren't the slick multi-pump stations we know today. Many were just a single pump in front of a general store or a mechanic's garage. But they were a lifeline for the new American traveler, a symbol that you were never too far from your next tank of gas and your next adventure. As journeys got longer, drivers needed a place to rest. The old city center hotels weren't convenient for motorists. What they needed was a place to park their car right outside their room. And so the motor hotel, or motel, was born. The first one, the Milestone Motel in California, opened in 1925. It offered simple, affordable lodging right by the highway. This concept exploded in popularity, and soon, the highways were lined with neon signs advertising vacancy, each one a beacon for the weary traveler. And what's a road trip without a good meal? The classic American diner became an icon of the open road. These prefabricated, often shiny, stainless steel restaurants served up quick, hearty and affordable food: burgers, fries, milkshakes, the perfect fuel for the road. Diners became more than just places to eat. They were social hubs, cultural melting pots where truckers, tourists, and locals all shared a counter. Gas stations, motels, and diners, they weren't just businesses. They were the essential pillars of a new roadside culture, an entire economy built around the freedom of the automobile. Now let's talk about the car that started it all. The Ford Model T. It wasn't the first car, but it was the first car for the people. Henry Ford's revolutionary assembly line made the Tin Lizzie so affordable that by the 1920s, many working-class families could own one. This mass ownership didn't just change how people traveled, it changed where and how they lived. Before the Model T, cities were compact. You had to live within walking distance, or a short streetcar ride from your job. But the car blew those boundaries wide open. Suddenly, you could live miles away from the city center, in a quieter, more spacious area with a yard and a driveway. This gave birth to the American suburb. New communities sprouted up on the outskirts of major cities, connected by the very roads we just talked about. The geography of the American city was being redrawn, with the downtown core for work and the sprawling suburbs for living. The single-family home with a two-car garage became a cornerstone of the American dream, a dream made possible by the automobile. This shift also affected rural America. Farmers, once isolated, could now drive into town to sell their goods, buy supplies, and socialize. The car helped break down the stark division between urban and rural life, creating a more interconnected and homogeneous national culture. It changed everything, from dating habits to shopping patterns, all because people could finally go wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted. Beyond the economic and geographical changes, the automobile introduced a whole new rhythm to American life. It fostered a spirit of independence, freedom, and discovery. The idea of the open road became ingrained in the American psyche. It was a powerful symbol of escape and opportunity. You could just get in your car and drive, leaving your troubles behind in the rearview mirror. This new culture was celebrated in music, literature, and film. Think of Jack Kerouac's On the Road, a novel that perfectly captures the restless, adventurous spirit of the automobile age. The road trip became a quintessential American experience, a rite of passage. It was about the journey, not just the destination. It was about seeing the vast, diverse landscapes of the country, from the Appalachian Mountains to the deserts of the Southwest, from the window of your own car. Life became faster, more spontaneous. The weekend getaway became a possibility. Families could visit relatives in other states. A new kind of leisure was born, centered around mobility. The car wasn't just a machine. It was a key that unlocked the nation. It created a shared experience, a collective memory of roadside attractions, scenic overlooks, and the endless hum of the highway. It was the rhythm of a nation in motion, a nation constantly reinventing itself, a nation transformed by the simple, profound freedom of the open road. From the first paved highways to the birth of the suburbs and the creation of a unique roadside culture, the automobile did more than just move us. It redefined who we were as a nation. It connected us, empowered us, and gave us a new sense of what was possible. The legacy of this transformation is all around us today. In the roads we drive, the places we live, and the enduring spirit of adventure that still calls us to the open road. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of the most transformative chapters in American history. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. We'd love to have you as part of our community. See you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. In our last chapter, we saw the Ford Model T reach the pinnacle of its success, becoming a symbol of modern life and an indispensable tool for millions. But as the old saying goes, what goes up must come down. Today, in Chapter 15, we read diving into the mounting challenges and fierce competition that began to cloud the skies over Ford's empire. This is the story of how the very principles that made the Model T a titan started to become its greatest weakness. For years, the Ford Motor Company had enjoyed an almost untouchable position. The Model T wasn't just a car. It was the asterisk car. It was affordable, reliable, and it had single-handedly put the world on wheels. Ford's assembly line was the marvel of the modern age, a perfectly oiled machine churning out cars at a speed and price no one else could match. From the outside, it seemed like the reign of the Model T would last forever. But in the fast-paced world of industry, success breeds imitation, and imitation often leads to innovation. The competition was watching, learning, and most importantly, adapting. While Ford was focused on making the Model T cheaper and faster to produce, other automakers started to think differently. They saw a gap in the market that Ford, in his quest for ultimate efficiency, was overlooking. The world was changing, and so were the desires of the American public. People who had once been thrilled just to own any car at all were starting to want something more. They were beginning to look for comfort, style, and a touch of personal expression in their automobiles. This was a shift in consumer mindset that Ford, steadfast in his vision, was slow to recognize. The first rumbles of trouble came from competitors who started offering features that the Model T simply didn't have. Electric starters, for example, were becoming more common. eliminating the need for the sometimes difficult and dangerous hand crank. Smoother transmissions, better suspension, and more comfortable interiors began appearing on other cars. These weren't just minor bells and whistles. They were significant improvements that made driving a more pleasant and accessible experience. While a competitor's car might cost a bit more for a growing number of buyers, the extra comfort and convenience were well worth the price. The problem for Ford was a deep-seated reluctance to change the winning formula. Henry Ford had a philosophy that was almost legendary. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black. This quote perfectly encapsulated his approach. To him, the Model T was a perfect utility machine. It did its job, and it did it well. Why complicate a perfect system with frivolous additions? He believed that variety and options would slow down the assembly line, increase costs, and betray the core principle of providing cheap, basic transportation for the masses. This rigidity, which had once been Ford's greatest strength, was now becoming a critical vulnerability. The world was no longer just the farmers and working-class families who needed a simple, rugged vehicle. A new middle class was emergent, with more disposable income and a taste for the finer things. They didn't just want to get from point A to point B. They wanted to enjoy the journey. They wanted a car that said something about who they were. And they were finding that other companies were more than happy to listen. No company seized this opportunity better than General Motors, under the brilliant leadership of Alfred P. Sloan. Sloan had a completely different vision for the automotive market. Where Ford saw one massive market for one standardized car, Sloan saw a ladder of success. He envisioned a range of brands, each aimed at a different income level and lifestyle. You could start with an affordable Chevrolet, and as your career and family grew, you could move up to a Pontiac, an Oldsmobile, a Buick, and finally, the pinnacle of luxury, a Cadillac. GM didn't just sell cars, they sold aspiration. And a key part of their strategy was style. While the Model T remained virtually unchanged year after year, GM introduced the concept of the annual model change. Each year, their cars would come out with new styling, new features, and most importantly, new colors. This created a sense of excitement and desire. Suddenly, owning last year's model felt a little outdated. Driving a car was no longer just about utility, it was about fashion. GM's cars were a stark contrast to the utilitarian Model T. They had sleek, curved lines, offered a rainbow of color choices, and boasted more powerful and smoother engines. They offered closed-body sedans that protected passengers from the elements, a significant step up from the often open-air Model T. These weren't just functional upgrades. They were emotional ones. A family could feel a sense of pride and status pulling up in a shiny new Chevrolet sedan that they simply couldn't get from a purely functional black Model T. The impact on Ford sales was gradual at first, but it was undeniable. The market was splitting. While the Model T still dominated the low-cost rural market, it was losing ground in the rapidly growing urban and suburban areas where style and comfort were becoming just as important as price. Ford dealers began to feel the pressure. They would report back to headquarters that customers were walking across the street to the Chevrolet dealership because they wanted a car with a different color or a more modern look. Yet Henry Ford remained stubborn. He believed that GM's strategy was a gimmick, a wasteful exercise in superficiality. He was convinced that the fundamental value of the Model T, its reliability and affordability, would ultimately prevail. He doubled down on his strategy, continuing to find ways to cut the price of the Model T, believing that a lower price tag was the only feature that truly mattered. In his mind, he was still competing in the world he had created, a world where the only question was whether or not you could afford a car at all. He failed to see that the world had moved on and a new question was being asked: which car do I want? This was the fundamental limit of uniformity. The very efficiency that allowed Ford to produce millions of identical cars also made the company inflexible. The entire production system, from the supply chain to the final assembly, was optimized for one single product. To introduce a new color would mean new paint processes, new supply logistics, and a disruption to the rhythm of the line. To change the chassis or engine would require a massive, costly retooling of the entire factory. Ford had built a perfect system for a world that was ceasing to exist. By the mid-1920s, the writing was on the wall. The Model T, the car that had changed the world, was starting to look like a relic from a bygone era. It was like a silent film star struggling to find its voice in the age of talking pictures. The public's desire for choice, for comfort, and for style was a force that even the mighty Ford Motor Company could not ignore forever. The era of unchallenged dominance was over, and a new, more competitive and more colorful automotive age was dawning. Ford was at a crossroads, facing a challenge that would test the very foundations of the company and force a decision that would define its future. The pressure was mounting, not just from the outside but from within Ford's own company, including from his own son, Edsel, who argued passionately for a more modern vehicle. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between the old guard and the new, between unwavering principle and the undeniable need for change. What would Henry Ford do? Would he adapt, or would he let his legendary creation fade into history? That's where we'll pick up the story in our next chapter. Thank you so much for joining us on this part of the journey. It's a fascinating look at how even the greatest success stories face moments of crisis. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We love reading your comments, so let us know what you think down below. We'll see you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into automotive history. Today, we arrive at a pivotal, somewhat bittersweet moment, the end of an era. We're talking about the final chapter of the Ford Model T, the car that put the world on wheels. Imagine the scene, May 26, 1927. The Highland Park assembly line, once a buzzing symphony of innovation, is about to fall silent. A sense of history hangs in the air. This isn't just the end of a production run. It's the conclusion of a revolutionary chapter in human history. After 19 years and more than 15 million cars, the final Model T, the Tin Lizzie that had become a global icon, was ready to roll off the line. So buckle up as we explore the story of its grand finale and the legacy it left behind. The decision to end Model T production wasn't made overnight. By the mid-1920s, the automotive landscape had changed dramatically, largely thanks to the very car Ford was about to retire. Competitors like General Motors, with their Chevrolet brand, were offering more than just basic transportation. They offered style, comfort, and choices. You could get a Chevy in different colors, with more powerful engines, and with creature comforts the Model T simply didn't have. The public's taste was evolving. The rugged, no-frills functionality of the Model T, once its greatest strength, was now seen by many as its biggest weakness. The famous line, "You can have any color as long as it's black," which was a brilliant efficiency move in 1914, now felt dated and restrictive. The world was ready for something new, and even Henry Ford, a man notoriously stubborn and resistant to change, had to finally accept this reality. Sales were slipping and the pressure was mounting. On that fateful day in May 1927, Henry Ford and his son, Edsel, personally drove the 15 millionth Model T off the assembly line. It was a carefully orchestrated media event, a symbolic farewell to the car that had defined their company and, in many ways, defined the 20th century. So as this last Tin Lizzie left the factory, it marked the end of a production run of unprecedented scale. For nearly 2 decades, the Model T was a constant, reliable presence in people's lives across the globe. From the farms of the American Midwest to the streets of London and the rugged landscapes of Australia, the Model T chugged along, carrying people, goods, and dreams. It was a doctor's trusted companion on house calls, a farmer's workhorse that could be adapted to power sawmills or pump water, and a family's ticket to a Sunday drive in the countryside. The car's simplicity was its genius. Most owners could perform their own repairs with a basic set of tools. It was tough, dependable, and affordable, a truly democratic vehicle. Its departure left a huge void in the market, but also an immense legacy that still shapes the automotive industry today. The shutdown of the Model T production line was a massive undertaking. It wasn't just a matter of flipping a switch. The entire Ford empire, centered around the Highland Park plant, had to be retooled. This was an industrial pivot on a scale the world had never seen. Thousands of workers were temporarily laid off as factories were shut down for 6 months. It was a period of great uncertainty and anticipation. What could possibly follow the Model T? The public and the press were buzzing with speculation. Henry Ford kept the details of his new car a closely guarded secret, building suspense to a fever pitch. This great Ford silence was a brilliant, if risky, marketing move. The world was holding its breath, waiting to see what the master of mass production would do next. It was a gamble. Could Ford strike gold twice? Could he create another vehicle that would capture the public's imagination and redefine the industry all over again? Behind the scenes, the transition was a monumental task. The revolutionary moving assembly line, which had been perfected for the single-minded purpose of building Model Ts, had to be completely dismantled and reconfigured. New, more complex machinery was designed and installed. The entire supply chain had to be overhauled. It was a logistical and engineering challenge of epic proportions. Henry Ford was essentially betting the entire company on this transition. A failure to launch the new model successfully could have been catastrophic. This period highlights the immense shift in industrial thinking. The era of a single, unchanging product was over. The future belonged to companies that could adapt, innovate, and respond to consumer desires for variety and improvement. Ford was learning this lesson the hard way, but he was learning it nonetheless. The end of the Model T wasn't just a farewell. It was a forced evolution. And what was the result of all this secrecy and retooling? The Ford Model A, when it was finally unveiled in December 1927, it was a sensation. Millions of people flocked to dealerships just to get a glimpse of it. The Model A was everything the Model T was not. It was stylish. Available in a range of colors like Niagara Blue and Dawn Gray, it featured a more powerful 40-horsepower engine, a standard 3-speed sliding gear transmission, a huge improvement over the Model T's planetary gear system, and 4-wheel mechanical brakes. It even had a conventional gas pedal, clutch, and brake pedal layout, which would become the standard for decades. The Model A was a clear signal that Ford was ready to compete in a new, more sophisticated market. It acknowledged that the car was no longer just a tool, but also a statement of style and personal expression. It was Ford's bold step into a new chapter. In retrospect, the end of the Model T era teaches us a powerful lesson about innovation and the relentless march of progress. The very success of the Model T created the conditions for its own obsolescence. By making car ownership accessible, it created a generation of experienced drivers and consumers who began to demand more than just the basics. Henry Ford's initial genius was in recognizing the need for simple, affordable transportation. His later struggle was in failing to recognize when the world he had created was ready to move on. The story of the Model T's finale is a classic business case study in the dangers of complacency and the necessity of staying attuned to the market. The Tin Lizzie wasn't defeated. It simply fulfilled its historic purpose. It had lifted society to a new level, and from that new vantage point, people could see a new horizon of possibilities. So, as we say a fond farewell to the Tin Lizzie, we don't mourn its passing, we celebrate its incredible life. Over 15 million units, a record that stood for decades, fundamentally reshaped our world. The Model T wasn't just a car. It was a catalyst for social and economic change on a global scale. It built industries, created suburbs, empowered individuals, and laid the groundwork for the modern, mobile world we live in today. Its departure in 1927 wasn't an end, but a transition, paving the way for the next generation of automobiles and cementing Ford's legacy as a true pioneer. The ghost of the Model T still echoes in every assembly line and every highway today. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through a monumental moment in automotive history. The story of the Ford Motor Company is far from over, and we have many more exciting chapters to explore. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, drive safe and keep exploring history. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. Today we're diving into the final, epic chapter of our story. The global legacy of a car that didn't just change a nation, but reshaped the entire world. This is about how the Ford Model T, a simple machine from Michigan, became a global phenomenon and taught the world a new way to live and work. Henry Ford's vision was never limited to the borders of the United States. He dreamed bigger. He saw a world on wheels, and his Model T was the vehicle to make it happen. By the 1920s, this vision was becoming a reality in the most tangible way imaginable. Ford factories were sprouting up on 5 different continents. From Manchester in England to Geelong in Australia, from São Paulo in Brazil to Port Elizabeth in South Africa, the rumble of the Ford assembly line became a universal sound. Imagine the scene. In places where cars were once a rare luxury, reserved only for the ultra-wealthy, suddenly, there was a factory. A factory that wasn't just assembling cars, but was assembling a new kind of future. These weren't just buildings, they were schools. They were universities of mass production. Ford didn't simply export cars. He exported the very idea of how to make them. He was teaching the world how to produce efficiently. Local workers, who might have been farmers or craftsmen just a few years prior, were now being trained in the intricate dance of the moving assembly line. They learned about specialization, about standardized parts, and about the relentless rhythm of efficiency. Ford sent his best engineers and managers across the globe to replicate the Highland Park and River Rouge miracles. They brought with them not just blueprints for a car, but a blueprint for a new industrial society. This system, this philosophy, became so influential that it earned its own name: Fordism. It wasn't just about manufacturing. Fordism represented a whole new economic and social model. At its core was the idea of mass production combined with mass consumption. The formula was revolutionary. Make products so efficiently that they become affordable for the very people who make them. This creates a cycle. Well-paid workers become a new class of consumers, who then buy the products they help create, fueling more production and, ideally, higher wages. Economists and industrialists from every corner of the world traveled to Detroit, not just to see the factories, but to understand the philosophy behind them. They saw how the $5 day wasn't just a generous wage. It was a strategic investment in creating a consumer market. This concept spread like wildfire. Factory owners in Europe and Asia began to rethink their entire approach. The old ways of small-batch, artisanal production began to look slow and outdated. Fordism became the benchmark, the gold standard for modern industry. It promised a path to prosperity, not just for a company, but for a whole nation. But the legacy of the Model T goes far beyond the factory floor. Its most profound impact was cultural. Think about what a car truly represents: freedom. Freedom to move, to explore, to connect. Before the affordable automobile, for most people in the world, your life was defined by the distance you could walk. Your village, your town, that was your universe. The Model T shattered those boundaries. Suddenly, a farmer in the English countryside could drive to the market in the nearest city. A family in Argentina could take a trip to see relatives in a distant province. The world, which had always seemed so vast and disconnected, began to feel smaller, more accessible. This wasn't just a convenience. It was a psychological revolution. It broadened horizons and created a sense of shared experience across huge geographical divides. The car changed our very concept of time and space. It led to the creation of new infrastructure: paved roads, gas stations, roadside motels, and diners. These weren't just American phenomena. They popped up wherever the car took hold. A new road culture was born, a culture of mobility and adventure. It influenced fashion, music, and even how we designed our cities, with the suburb becoming a direct result of people's ability to commute from home to work. The affordable car empowered individuals in ways that were previously unimaginable. It gave rural families access to better schools and healthcare. It allowed businesses to expand their reach. It gave young people a newfound sense of independence. The simple black Model T became a symbol of progress, of modernity, and of the democratic ideal that opportunities and the open road should be available to everyone, not just the privileged few. From a single idea in a small workshop in Detroit, Henry Ford unleashed a force that would reorganize global industry, create new social structures, and fundamentally change the daily lives of millions of people. He didn't just build a car. He built the modern world. The echo of that assembly line in 1913 can still be heard today in every factory that strives for efficiency, in every product made for the mass market, and in the freedom we feel every time we get behind the wheel and set off on a journey. The Model T's production eventually ended in 1927, after more than 15 million had been built. The world was moving on to more stylish, more comfortable cars. But its legacy was permanent. It had put the world on wheels, and in doing so, had set in motion a century of unprecedented change. The global legacy of the Model T is a story of how one simple, robust, and affordable machine democratized mobility and, in the process, helped create the interconnected world we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of the Ford Model T. It's been a fascinating ride, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. If you found this series interesting, please hit that like button And consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on our future explorations. We have a lot more stories to tell. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Welcome back to our series on the Titans of Industry. Today, we're diving deep into a topic we can't ignore: the controversies surrounding Henry Ford. We've talked about his genius, his innovations, and how he put the world on wheels. But no story is complete without looking at the full picture, and Ford's legacy is as complex as they come. This is Chapter 18, Critics and Controversies. So let's start with the $5 workday. On the surface, it sounded revolutionary, doubling the average wage overnight. It attracted thousands of workers to Detroit, all hoping for a piece of the American dream. But this incredible offer came with strings attached, and they were tied very tightly. This wasn't just a paycheck. It was an entry ticket into Ford's vision of an ideal life, and he had very specific ideas about what that looked like. To qualify for the full $5, workers had to submit to inspections by Ford's sociological department. Imagine this: company agents showing up at your home, unannounced. They would interview you, your family, even your neighbors. They checked if your house was clean, if you were saving money, if you were sober, and if you were living what they considered a proper American life. If you didn't meet their standards, you could lose half your pay. This level of control was unprecedented. Ford believed he was helping his workers become better citizens, but for many, it felt like an invasion of privacy, a blurring of the line between employer and warden. It raises a huge question: how much control should a company have over its employees' personal lives? Life inside the factory wasn't much easier. The assembly line, Ford's great engine of efficiency, was also a source of immense pressure. The work was monotonous, repetitive, and physically demanding. Workers described it as a relentless machine that never stopped. You performed the same small task over and over for hours on end, all while trying to keep up with the unceasing pace of the conveyor belt. There was no room for creativity, no space for conversation. You were, in essence, a cog in a much larger machine. This high-efficiency model came at a human cost, leading to burnout, exhaustion, and a feeling of dehumanization that many workers struggled with. This strict environment naturally led to tensions between management and labor. Henry Ford was famously and fiercely anti-union. He saw labor unions not as representatives of the workers, but as a threat to his control and his vision of efficiency. He believed that he knew what was best for his employees, and that any outside organization would only stir up trouble and disrupt production. To enforce this, Ford employed a man named Harry Bennett, who ran the company's service department. This wasn't your typical HR department. It was essentially an internal security force, known for its strong-arm tactics. The service department was notorious for spying on employees, intimidating union organizers, and using physical force to break up any attempts to unionize. The most infamous example of this was the Battle of the Overpass in 1937, when union organizers, including Walter Reuther, were peacefully distributing leaflets outside the River Rouge plant. They were brutally attacked by Bennett's men in front of photographers and journalists. The images from that day shocked the nation and became a powerful symbol of the struggle for workers' rights. It took years of pressure, including a massive strike in 1941, before Ford finally, and reluctantly, signed a contract with the United Auto Workers Union. So how do we make sense of this? On one hand, you have a visionary who revolutionized manufacturing, paid his workers a wage that created a middle class, and fundamentally changed modern society. He believed in efficiency, progress, and providing a product that could benefit everyone. He truly thought his methods were for the greater good, creating stability and prosperity for his workforce. On the other hand, his methods were often authoritarian. He imposed his personal values on his employees, suppressed their rights to organize, and created a work environment that many found soul-crushing. His pursuit of efficiency often seemed to overshadow his concern for individual humanity. This is the great paradox of Henry Ford. Was he a benevolent paternalist or a controlling autocrat? A captain of industry or a tyrant of the assembly line? The truth, as it often is, lies somewhere in the middle. Ford's legacy is a powerful reminder that progress isn't always a straight line. The drive for efficiency and the need for human dignity are often in conflict. And finding the right balance is a challenge we still face today in workplaces all around the world. History doesn't view Henry Ford as a simple hero or villain. It sees him as a complicated, brilliant, and deeply flawed individual whose impact is still felt in every car on the road and every factory floor in operation. His story forces us to ask difficult questions about the price of progress and the true meaning of a good job. It is a debate that started in his factories over a century ago and continues in our conversations about work, technology, and society today. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the complex legacy of Henry Ford. It is crucial to understand all sides of these influential figures to truly grasp their impact on our world. If you found this discussion thought-provoking, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more explorations into the lives of history's great innovators. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Where do you think the line is between efficiency and humanity? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back to our series on the Ford Model T. Today, we're taking a look at Chapter 19, the Model T in Memory. Although the last Tin Lizzie rolled off the assembly line nearly a century ago, its story is far from over. In fact, it's alive and well, thanks to a passionate global community that keeps its legacy rattling and rolling into the 21st century. So, where can you find a Model T today? Well, for starters, in museums all around the world. From the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, to smaller local history museums, the Model T is a star attraction. It stands as a silent testament to an era of incredible change. These aren't just dusty relics behind velvet ropes. They are time capsules. They allow us to stand inches away from the machine that put the world on wheels to see the simple engineering, the sturdy frame, and imagine what it must have been like to climb aboard for the very first time. These institutions play a crucial role in preserving not just the cars themselves, but the stories and the social context that made them so revolutionary. They are educational centers, teaching new generations about industrial innovation, mass production, and the birth of modern consumer culture. But the Model T isn't just confined to museums. Its spirit is most vibrant out on the open road, thanks to thousands of dedicated collectors and enthusiasts. These aren't just car owners. They are custodians of history. They are mechanics, historians, and storytellers all rolled into one. For them, owning a Model T is an interactive hobby. It's about getting your hands greasy, understanding the quirks of a planetary transmission, and mastering the art of the hand crank. All over the world, clubs like the Model T Ford Club of America and the Model T Ford Club International create a network for these enthusiasts. They provide invaluable resources, from sourcing rare parts to sharing restoration tips. Their forums and newsletters are filled with a passion that's truly infectious. They connect people who share a common love for this simple car, creating friendships that span continents and generations. This community is the lifeblood of the Model T's continued existence, ensuring that the knowledge needed to maintain and operate these century-old vehicles isn't lost to time. And this passion really comes to life during parades, vintage rallies, and car shows. Imagine a 4th of July parade in a small town. What's leading the procession? Often, it's a beautifully restored Model T, chugging along proudly, its brass radiator gleaming in the sun. Or picture a massive vintage rally where hundreds of Model Ts gather, creating a sea of black paint and a symphony of unique engine sounds. These events are more than just car shows. They are rolling museums, celebrations of a bygone era. You see Model Ts of all kinds: pristine touring cars, rugged-looking pickup trucks, and even quirky speedsters, modified by early hot rodders. Each car has a story, a history told through its dings, its patches, and its perfectly polished paint. Owners, often dressed in period attire, are eager to share these stories, to talk about their restoration journey, or to explain the peculiar starting procedure to a curious child. It's here, in these shared public moments, that the Model T transcends being a mere object and becomes a focal point for community and celebration. This brings us to a deeper point: the Model T as a nostalgic time machine. For many, the sight and sound of a Tin Lizzie evoke a powerful sense of nostalgia, even for a time they never lived in. It represents a perceived simpler era, a time of dirt roads, family picnics, and newfound freedom. It symbolizes the dawn of the American century, a period of optimism, ingenuity, and boundless possibility. When we see a Model T, we're not just seeing a car. We're seeing a sepia-toned photograph come to life. We can almost hear the laughter of a family on their first road trip, feel the excitement of a farmer driving into town without a horse, and sense the pride of a worker who could finally afford the very product they helped build. This nostalgic power is why the Model T appears so frequently in movies and television shows set in the early 20th century. It's a powerful visual shorthand for the era. It instantly transports the audience back in time, setting the stage more effectively than any line of dialogue could. It's a cultural touchstone, a universally recognized symbol of a transformative period in human history. And that's the ultimate journey of the Model T, from the factory floor to a cultural icon. It started as a utilitarian product, a piece of machinery designed to be affordable and reliable. Henry Ford's vision was practical, to create a car for the great multitude. He wasn't trying to build a legend. He was trying to solve a transportation problem. But in doing so, he and his team created something that resonated far beyond its mechanical parts. The Model T became woven into the very fabric of society. It changed how we lived, where we worked, and how we spent our leisure time. It spurred the growth of suburbs, the creation of national highway systems, and the rise of a mobile, interconnected culture. It was more than a car. It was a catalyst for social change. Over its 19-year production run, the Model T became a familiar part of the landscape, as common as a telephone pole or a farmhouse. As the years passed and the Model T was replaced by newer, faster, and more comfortable cars, its status began to shift. It evolved from an everyday tool into a cherished antique. It became a symbol not of the present, but of the past, a past that shaped our present in profound ways. Its journey from a mass-produced commodity to a revered icon is a testament to its incredible impact. It's a story of innovation, accessibility, and the enduring power of a simple idea to change the world. The Model T in memory is not a static image. It is a dynamic living legacy, kept alive by the curators, collectors, and storytellers who ensure that the chug of the Tin Lizzie will be heard for generations to come. It reminds us that some machines are more than just metal and gears. They are vessels of our collective history and our shared dreams. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through the memory of the Model T. If you've enjoyed this look into its enduring legacy, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the history of the automobile. We'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back. We've reached the final chapter of our journey, Chapter 20, The Engine That Still Echoes. It's a moment for reflection, a time to listen to the sounds of history and understand the forces that have shaped our world. So, take a deep breath, and let's step into this final meditation on progress, innovation, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Have you ever stopped to truly listen to the world around you? Not just the birds or the wind, but the deeper, more constant hum. The distant rumble of a train, the low thrum of a factory, the whir of a server farm cooling itself. These are not just noises, they are the echoes of a revolution. They are the lullaby of our modern age, a constant reminder of the relentless drive for progress that defines us as a species. It's a sound that began with a spark of an idea, a single piston firing in a dimly lit workshop. It all started with a dream. A dream inside the mind of one person, then another and another. Think about it, every great leap forward began as a seemingly impossible thought. The idea that we could harness the power of steam, that we could turn heat and water into motion, was once pure fantasy. But it was a dream fueled by an unshakable belief in what could be. This is the essence of human drive, the refusal to accept the world as it is, and the relentless pursuit of the world as it could be. It's the curiosity that asks, what if? And the determination that says we will. This drive didn't just build machines. It built nations. It laid tracks across continents, connected cities, and made the world smaller and more accessible than ever before. Consider the story of the first transcontinental railroad. It was a monumental task, a battle against nature, distance, and doubt. But it was powered by the conviction that connecting people, goods, and ideas was a goal worth any sacrifice. Each swing of the hammer, each spike driven into a wooden tie, was an act of faith in the future. It was the physical manifestation of a collective dream. That one man's dream, the dream of a reliable engine, didn't just reshape our physical world. It reshaped our society. It created new industries, new jobs, and new ways of life. It pulled people from rural farms to bustling cities, creating the vibrant, complex urban landscapes we know today. The rhythm of the factory floor became the new heartbeat of civilization. For the first time in history, the pace of life was dictated not by the sun and the seasons, but by the relentless, untiring power of the machine. This transformation wasn't without its challenges, of course. Progress often comes with a cost. The rapid industrialization brought about profound social changes, creating new struggles and inequalities. But it also ignited new conversations about justice, workers' rights, and the kind of society we wanted to build. The same engine that powered the factories also powered the printing presses that spread new ideas, fueling movements for change and reform. In this way, the engine of progress is also an engine of self-reflection. It forces us to constantly ask ourselves, what kind of future are we building, and for whom? Listen closely again. Can you hear it? That hum of machinery is more than just a sound. It's a lullaby. It's the background music to generations of human history. For a child growing up near a railway line, the whistle of a passing train wasn't a disturbance. It was a promise of distant lands and exciting possibilities. For the worker on the assembly line, the rhythmic clang of the machinery was the sound of a steady paycheck, of a family being fed, of future being secured. It's a sound that speaks of ambition, of toil, and of the quiet pride that comes from building something with your own hands. This lullaby of history tells a story of constant reinvention. The steam engine gave way to the internal combustion engine. The factory assembly line evolved into the automated robotic workshops of today. And now, the hum of physical machinery is being joined by the silent, powerful whir of digital information. The engine has changed form, moving from iron and steam to silicon and data, but its core function remains the same: to extend the reach of human capability. The code we write today is the modern equivalent of the steam valve, a tool for turning ideas into reality. And that brings us to the heart of it all: creativity. The engine, in all its forms, is ultimately a testament to human creativity. It's the ability to see a problem and envision a solution, to connect disparate ideas and forge them into something new and powerful. This creative spark is not limited to engineers and inventors. It lives in the artist who paints a new vision of the world, the writer who crafts a story that changes our perspective, and the teacher who inspires a student to dream bigger. It is the most fundamental engine of all, the engine of the human mind. Our journey through history has shown us that this engine is unstoppable. It has weathered wars, economic collapses, and societal upheavals. It has adapted and evolved, constantly finding new fuel, new forms, new expressions. The desire to create, to improve, to transform our reality is woven into the very fabric of our being. It is what has carried us from caves to castles, from steamships to starships. As we close this chapter, let's take a moment for a final meditation. Think about the dreams that you hold. What is the engine that drives you? What is the transformation you wish to see in the world or in your own life? Remember that every great change begins with a single creative thought. Your ideas have power. Your drive has the potential to reshape the world in ways you can't even imagine yet. The echoes of the first engine are still with us, not just in the machines that surround us, but in the spirit of innovation that continues to push us forward. The story is far from over. We are all, in our own way, engineers of the future. We are all tending to the fire, stoking the flames of creativity and keeping the engine of progress running. The hum of machinery is not just a sound from the past. It is the rhythm of our present and the overture to our future. It is the enduring song of human potential, a melody that still echoes and always will. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. It has been an honor to explore these ideas with you. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the ideas that shape our world. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes and never stop dreaming.